There are, and you guys may be in the same place, there are certain things about my childhood that I think I always remember. You know, just kind of the different things, you probably get the same ones. I always remember, standing in front of the little wall heater that we had in our living room because it was a garage that was converted. We'd stand in front of that. I remember that. I remember unwrapping the aluminum foil around my mom's homemade chicken salad sandwiches whenever we would take a trip in the car. You know, we wouldn't get 5 miles down the road and everybody had to have a sandwich. I also remember, I always remember my dad. He would come home from lunch. He'd come home from Safeway. He'd come home at lunch. He'd sit down and eat a sandwich, potato chips. And as soon as he was done, he would push back his chair, lay down on the floor, put his feet on his chair, and he would take a nap for 15 minutes. And at 15 minutes, like clockwork, he'd sit up, gotta go. And out the door he went. My dad was the king of the power nap. I mean, he really was. He was one of those. In fact, we always had a pillow that was in the house that said, "I'm not dead, I'm sleeping." Just to make sure. He could catch one anywhere. But, what was funny is, and we never really sat down and kind of talked about it, but I kind of came to the realization later on, my dad didn't take naps because he was tired. He took naps so he didn't get tired. It really was. It was just part of, to him, I think, as much as anything, it was kind of preventive medicine. It was just part of his rhythm of who he was. And so, with that in mind, I want to shift gears for just a second, then we're going to come back into being the best you. One of the things that I love about the Bible is that many times the Bible, it doesn't spend a whole lot of time trying to rationalize or explain what it tells you. And what I mean is that things are assumed. A lot of times if I sit up here or I go somewhere and I'm trying to make a point or apply a principle or teach something, a lot of times we do what? We end up laying out all kinds of facts and figures, and we appeal to another authority, and we point to this study, and we want to kind of bring all of this together. And what's funny is that when you look at the Bible, you don't see that. Okay, you see things just stated, and it's kind of like the author says, well, it is that way because I said it is that way. Which, by the way, is what God did say. It is that way because I said it is that way. God does not appeal to any higher authority when he lays out many things and says this is how it's going to be, or when he gives us commands or different things to do. And the reason he does is because there is no higher authority to appeal to. He is God. And so when he says this is how it is, this is how it is. And I know some people have a hard time with that because we don't like anybody to tell us what to do. Or because we think that we're smarter than everybody else, and so we can figure it out. But the fact is that God knows better than all of us, and so with that being said, we're going to kind of come back and launch into what today's message and our part of being the best you is, and that is the topic of Sabbath, the topic of rest. And I know a lot of people, we've got all kinds of ideas of why this shouldn't happen and why it doesn't apply to us. I tell you the truth, the fact is that the concept of a Sabbath is a thread that runs all the way throughout the Bible from beginning to end. Okay? And I think that it is very relevant and it is very important to us today, because the fact is that we live in a society in which busyness is the norm, isn't it? I mean, we ask almost anybody that's not sitting in here today, okay, because you know what the answer should be, so you won't give it. Today, talk to somebody, and I will guarantee you, 7 out of 10 people, if not more, if you walk up to them and go, "Hey, how's it going? How you doing? What's going on?" One of our obligatory greetings that we have, 7 out of 10 times you are going to get something that sounds close to this. "Oh, just busy. just staying busy. Oh, I'm up to my neck, trying to stay caught up. And that's what it always is. That's what we always hear. And it's almost like we have gotten to this point that we wear our busyness around as a badge of honor. I mean, we live in a society that says if you ain't busy, you ain't trying. Don't we? If you're not busy, you're just not doing it right. If you're not busy, you're not putting forth enough effort. That's the society that we live in. I mean, think about it. Isn't that why the drive-through window was invented? We're so busy we can't even get out of the car. We have to cram dinner in between one event and the next. And understand me, I am not pointing a finger at anybody that I'm not pointing at myself. Okay? So you can just simmer down. Because I am just as bad, but that seems the way our society is. In fact, we have even come up with, I say we carry it like a badge of honor. We've even come up with excuses or rationalization. I always love this one. Well, it's not about quantity of time, it's about quality of time. Don't we ever say that? Quality over quantity. Mm-hmm. Here's the deal. Without quantity, you'll never have quality. The end of story. Okay? But we rationalize that. We're like, oh, we're just so busy. But it's about quality time. We will spend all kinds of money on apps and planners and calendars and time management, self-help books and everything else, trying to figure out how to better control our schedule. But the fact is, we're still going to find ourselves what? At the end of the day, we're like, oh, I just wish there was more hours in the day. Or wish there was, we just need more days in the week. That's what we always say, isn't it? But here's the hard truth, okay? You can change your schedule all you want, okay? But until you change your master, you will never get the rest that you desperately need. I'll say that again. You can change your schedule all you want, but until you change your master, you will never get the rest that you desperately need. And I know you said, well, oh, what are you talking about? We're going to go back here and we're going to look Genesis 2:2. Very beginning. It says, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Now, is this to say that God was worn out? Was God pooped? He'd been working for 6 straight days, and now he's just, tuckered out? No. No, what it is that God understood something that we need to know, and that is that we need rest. And because we need rest, he modeled a radical practice for us to follow, and that was the institution of a day of rest. That was the Sabbath. And I said earlier, this is a theme that runs all throughout the Bible. Okay, it is a theme that runs all throughout the Bible. In fact, if you go and look, you find it. Number one, it's right here. But you find that when the Israelites are out in the wilderness, God issues it as a command. And he says that you're to honor the Sabbath and make it holy. He says that there is to be a Sabbath day. The Jews even had their whole cycle of life was based upon Sabbath. Sabbath days, Sabbath years. Every 7th year was to be a Sabbath year. The land was to lie fallow. You weren't supposed to sow or reap from the land on that 7th year. And then they even he had the year of Jubilee, which there's some discussion there of whether it was the 49th or the 50th. But 7 sevens, you had even a super Sabbath, if you want to call it that, because we had everything supersized. So we had super Sabbath on that 50th year is what I believe the way it looks like. So actually, 2 years that you were not to reap or to sow, it was, And so that was that Jubilee year, but it was all a cycle of Sabbaths, and it was work and rest. Work and rest. And one of the things is that A lot of us, we look at the Sabbath, and what do we call it? We think it is archaic, we think it is outdated, we think that it is irrelevant, okay? God didn't know what society was going to look like today. Okay. We kind of had it that way. The fact is, though, that I think the teaching of Sabbath even teaches us, and it's a principle that really falls in. I was doing some looking. After 40 hours, productivity drops. After 50 hours, whoop, it goes right off of the cliff. In fact, there's some studies that at 60 hours, you are actually, in that 60 hours, you are less productive than if you had worked 30. I mean, it's amazing at the drop-off, the number of mistakes and everything else. But the fact is that working longer hours actually decreases productivity. But I will say this. This is not about productivity. This is just about the fact that from the very beginning, okay, God has established a Sabbath, a day of rest. He says we need it. We have got to have it. But I will. There's also something that's kind of in the Ten Commandments. If you go to Exodus 20, we're not going to go there today, but I would challenge you to go back sometime and read it. In Exodus 20, we find the Ten Commandments. Okay. Now we've all talked about the Ten Commandments. There are two of them that really apply to this. God says He prohibits idolatry. Okay. That we are not to have any graven images, no other gods before me. And so He prohibits idolatry, and He also gives us the Sabbath law. Okay? 2 of the 10 commandments. So what you got, 2 of the 10 commandments, that means 20% of the commandments, but go back and read it, and what you'll find is that they take up 60% of the text. In other words, God had more to say in the 10 commandments about idolatry and the Sabbath than He did lying, stealing, murder, and all the rest combined. Now, is it because those are worse? No. No, but I do think that one of the things that is very important is, think about this, the idolatry, which in our culture, and really about any culture, our major source of idolatry is what? Materialism. Do you ever notice that the idolatry of materialism and the refusal to cease from our work go hand in hand? Most often they are violated in tandem. They go together. And God knew that. And so I think that is the reason you do see, it's no coincidence that the 2 of those do take up 60% of the text. And that's why I say that, you can change your schedule all you want, but until you change your master, you'll never get the rest that we desperately, desperately need. Until you recognize God's ownership of your 2 most valuable commodities, your time and your treasure. Okay? Until you recognize His ownership of those, you will never be the best you that you can be. You're not going to. But I do think that when we lay hold of that truth, what we'll find is that we're happier. We live longer. We're more productive. We're healthier. In so many ways, it's amazing the results that it has. So let's kind of talk here for a little bit. What is the Sabbath? We're going to talk about what it is that it means to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy as well, and apply what it means to us. Understand this. The establishment of the Sabbath is about more than just sleeping all day. It's not just laying around in your pajamas, and that's not what was intended, okay? I think that it's also, and it's interesting as you read stuff, I know I say a lot of times that it is no coincidence, but it's no coincidence. There are none. You notice that as you go and you read the 4th commandment, that before God talks about ceasing from your work, He says to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. He focuses on honoring the day and keeping it holy before He focuses on ceasing from your work. The Sabbath is meant to be a day of worship, and I would add that I believe it is a day of corporate worship. Now I know that we do Facebook, and I love the fact that we do Facebook. To everybody that's on Facebook, hello, we're glad you're here. In fact, here just a second, everybody turn around and look at the iPad and say hi to Emmy and Virgil. Can you say that because they're watching on Facebook? Say hi. Okay. I love the fact that we do Facebook. That's great. I love the fact that you can get online and you can do podcasts or you can listen to messages. I think that is amazing. But the fact is that we are called, I believe, by God to come together. Sabbath worship was always it was a corporate, it was a community, it was a family event. It was not intended to be an isolated, a solitary event. That isn't what it was intended to be. We were intended to come together as brothers and sisters in Christ and to worship together. And I think that's what God wanted then. It's what He wants now. I also think that the Sabbath is a day that is to be set apart for the Lord, and we rest from our work. That does not mean that we can't do any physical labor. It doesn't mean that we're not allowed to exert any energy. I think, and this is where it ties back to being joined with the commandment about materialism. The Sabbath and taking a day to cease from our work is a day to quit working on our kingdom and to relax in God's kingdom. Think about that. The Sabbath is intended for us to rest from working on our kingdom and to relax in His kingdom. And so, but I do want to say one thing. Please, please, please do not hear me to say, and let us not fall into the trap of becoming legalistic, like the religious leaders did. The religious leaders, during the time leading up to Jesus, they had taken the Sabbath command and they had turned it into a list of religious edicts and requirements. Okay, in fact, there were 39 categories of Sabbath prohibitions. 39! And I'm not saying 39 things you couldn't do. 39 categories of things that you couldn't do. You could only walk so far, and any longer than that was a journey, was not a hike, whatever you want to call it. You could only walk so far. You could only use a certain size. If your fork was too big to shovel food into your face, then that was work. So you could only use one of a certain size. One of them I loved was that if you could latch your sandals with one hand, that was acceptable. If it took two, that was work. I mean, it's kind of, you get into this of what, you couldn't start a fire, you couldn't put out a fire. I mean, it's kind of weird. For a while when I was in appliances, I used to sell, they have what is called, kosher appliances. You have appliances that have Sabbath mode. And you can't have lights come on when you do certain things, and if you open the door, the light can't come on, but you can have something come on for, can't make ice, a lot of stuff that you find in there. Here was the one, though, when I was looking that I loved. Okay. And Lois, you'll be interested. If a chicken lays an egg on the Sabbath, you can't eat the egg. You can't. Now, if you hatch the egg, then you can eat the chicken that comes from that egg, or you can eat the eggs that come from that chicken. But you cannot eat the egg that was laid on the Sabbath. Don't ask me why. But we had turned it, so much of this had turned into just these religious edicts and these things that weren't about the intent of the command. They were sticking to the letter of the command, the letter of the law, and turned it into all these things, but it wasn't about the intent of it. Okay, so in other words, they got so focused on this: cease from your work, and no, none of your animals and none of your maidservants or your maids, anybody else should be working. And they got so caught up on that they forgot why. And so they had taken the Sabbath, and here's it. They had taken the Sabbath, and instead of making it a blessing, they had turned it into a burden. They had made it a law that had to be kept. And I think this is where we need to be careful to not do the same. In fact, it's interesting. Look at most of Jesus' disagreements with the Pharisees. You know what they were over? Sabbath law. There's so much of it. And that's what it was, is that they had all of the, oh, you can't do that. And Jesus was like, quote, watch me. But so many of his disagreements were about that. You know, about Sabbath regulations and things that they said you weren't allowed to do. And so I think we need to be careful not to fall into that same trap. And before you think that I'm up here telling you that if you're, not taking a Sabbath and going to church and resting all day, that, somehow you're not observing the Sabbath, keeping it holy, and you're going to hell. That's not what I'm saying. Not my job. I'm not going to sit here and judge and make it, that's not it at all. But I do want to say this, because there's somebody right now that's thinking, but we're not Jewish. Interesting tidbit. The Sabbath was instituted before Judaism. The idea of a day of rest was instituted by God on the seventh day of creation before Judaism was ever founded. So it predates that. Okay? Your next interesting tidbit. Which of the other 10 commandments do we want to throw out if we're just going to toss that one as being irrelevant? It is part of the moral law. God established it. Okay? And once again, I'm not going to sit up here and get legalistic and say, well, if you're not, then no. That's not it at all. But the fact is, it's not outdated and it's not irrelevant, and we need to pay attention to it. Now, we talk about Sunday, and I know we always see the Sabbath as being Sunday. Paul was very clear about the fact that, that some people see one day as it is more holy than another, special than another, and so there is no requirement that it has to be Sunday, okay? There are people that work on Sunday. There are people that cannot be in church on Sunday morning. I get that, okay? And that's fine. Okay, if you cannot, then you can take another day. And I would say that if that's the case, find that other day, schedule that day, and find a way, if possible, yes, set it aside for the Lord, but secondly, make it a day when you can attend corporate worship of some way, not just single, solitary, okay? But can we be honest for just a second? Because, and there's some that we're on, there is just no way. I have to work on Sunday. That's all there's to it. Okay? For the majority of us, that's more borderline. Okay? We may choose to, we don't always, it's kind of, it's one of those that I don't think it's, we like to make it very, very black and white. And here's my point. If we have the option to be intentional about making Sunday our Sabbath day and our Lord's day, then I think we need to do exactly that and be intentional about it. Okay? Because if we're not intentional about doing it on Sunday, when there is accountability, when there is, I'm sorry, it's built into the schedule. We get churches all over town. You go to them, come here, but just wanted to clarify. No, but seriously, Sunday is kind of that recognized day, and so if we can, and we're not intentional about trying to make it happen, are we really going to be that intentional about doing it on Tuesday? Let's be honest. Probably not. We're probably not. Okay? And here's the deal. It's, once again, it's not about legalism. It's about the fact of us putting God first. It's our willingness to set aside time to worship. It is about us being willing to take a rest from building our kingdom. Okay? And like I said, it's not... Your attendance can be perfect on Sunday. That does not make you any better in God's eyes. Just gonna tell you, that doesn't make you any more righteous. Doesn't make you. It makes you more religious, maybe, but it doesn't make you more righteous. Okay, but it doesn't make you any better in His eyes. This all goes back to the intent. The teaching, the concept of the Sabbath was not for it to be a burden. It was for it to be a blessing for us. That's what it was intended as. And so, God didn't give us the Sabbath so that we had another religious ritual that we could keep up with. He gave it to us because he knew, I mean, this is the one who created us, and he knew we need rest. We need time to stop, to disconnect, to unplug, to decompress, to just breathe. He knows we need that. And so he put it in place on the seventh day of all creation and said, this is what it's for, to stop and to take that time. And so he instituted it there. I remember when I was in sales, there were 2 days that I always had. Didn't demand, but I always asked for off whenever I'd apply for a job, is that I wanted Sundays and Wednesdays off. Okay? And I had to work a few Sundays. There was times when they had special events, and I would end up having to work, a Sunday. But the fact is, and I don't say this as being braggadocious, but you know what? God blessed me in my sales. I missed in retail. Sunday, I missed one of the biggest retail days. I never struggled from a sales standpoint. God always blessed it. God always took care of it. Okay? Because I had made that decision ahead of time and said, this is what I'm asking, and here's why. I don't think it is any coincidence, once again, no coincidences, that Chick-fil-A is more profitable and more productive per store than McDonald's, Starbucks, and Subway combined. And they're closed on Sunday. Their founders, their owners decided that they were going to honor a Sabbath day. And they did it company-wide. I mean, they could have done it just on their own and said, hey, everybody needs to stay open. But they went that next step and said, we're going to do it company-wide. Okay? Does not mean that every person that works at Chick-fil-A is a Christian. Does not mean that on Sunday every single Chick-fil-A employee goes to church. That's not what it means. Okay? But what it does mean is that the opportunity is there if they want to. And that is what the owners made that decision. And as a result, we look at it and we're like, holy cow. I mean, they're just blowing the doors off of it. So, this isn't about profit in business, but I think the fact is this is why Jesus reclaimed the Sabbath from religion and he gave it back to humanity. And that's what brings us to our key verse. In Matthew chapter 2, verses 27 and 28, this is our verse for the week. It says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And there are two things here. The first is that Jesus, once again, he's reminding us, as we said, that the principle of a Sabbath rest is intended to bless us, not burden us. Okay? It's there for our good. But secondly, Jesus establishes his authority over the Sabbath. Which I'll say this, the next time that we get hung up on all the religious aspects of it, we kind of write it off as something they used to do, or something that's irrelevant or ancient. Be mindful of the fact that Jesus felt it was important enough that he tied his lordship to the commandment of the Sabbath. In fact, in the passage that we're looking at and in others, it was his statement that the Son of Man is the Lord even of the Sabbath that led the religious leaders to want to stone him. That's how important he felt the Sabbath and the true intent of it was. When Jesus healed on the Sabbath, he was declaring that, that they had taken something and turned it into something it was never intended to be. I love when he points out their lunacy. He says, okay, so hold on. So if one of your sheep or your sons falls into a pit, it's work to pull them out. Of course they wouldn't do that. Yeah, I do remember this was when we were CCY. We had one of our young ladies, single mom, needed a fence built at her house. Had 3 little kids and needed a fence built. And so the shepherds, which is our elders, we went out one Sunday. We were able to get together. We went out 2 Sundays in a row, and we built a fence for her. And I still remember, though, we had not a whole lot, but we caught some flack for it because we were gathering together, the elders. We were going out and working on a Sunday. so we shouldn't be doing good on a Sunday. Okay, no, that is when we're getting caught up in this religious aspect of it instead of what it is supposed to be. And that is that the Sabbath should be a day, that this Sunday as we see it, should be a day that is set aside for the worship of the Lord and to rest, to let our bodies just rest. But it's not about rules and regulations and, that the key is, here, I know it sounds like I'm making all kinds of rules and regulations. I'm saying, you're not in church next week. That's not it, okay? But you guys know my schedule, okay? My schedule is all over the place. I mean, yes, I'm here on Sunday, but I never really know what the week is going to hold. A lot of times it changes, and so there are times, there's sometimes when my message and my PowerPoint, I'm done Thursday, and I'm out of here. And then there are other times when it's Friday at 5:30 and I'm getting it done before I get out of here, okay? But one of the things that I've always found, though, is that when I know I've got something coming, okay, when I know that, maybe I'm going up to my mom's or, going doing something, so I can't be here on Friday. I have noticed that when I am intentional about that, I am much better at making sure I know everything's got to be done by Thursday when I walk out of here. And it happens. Okay? And all I'm saying is that it is the same way with us. I mean, it's like the same thing of when you decide that you're going to set aside a tithe. Okay? There's two ways that you can give when we pass the plate. One is that you can decide that you are going to set aside a tithe. That you are going to set aside, as the Bible says, a sum of money in keeping with your income, and you're going to give it. And you know what happens sometimes when you do that and you've made that decision? You have to make some sacrifices. There may be something you don't buy. You have to make some decisions so that you can bring that on the day. It's a whole different deal than just when the tray is passed on Sunday morning, you're going, I got a couple of bucks, and throwing it in there. Okay? Or looking in the checkbook to see what do we got left. Okay, well, I'll give a portion of that. Okay, there's a difference. And it's the same way when it comes to Sunday. Okay? There's one that says, you know what? We're going to be there, and so we're going to make sure and set that day aside. It is going to be a day of worship. That is different than going, than on Saturday night, sitting around and go, hey, you know what? We ain't got anything going on tomorrow. Let's go to church. Right? One is making, and I think this is what's so important, is that it's not about the attendance. It's about the intention. It is about you being intentional of saying, this is important to me. And because it is important to me, I am going to make sure and get these things done. I'm going to put that off. I'm going to rearrange this because that day and that time is important to me. We'd do it for our kids, wouldn't we? We'll do it to see our grandkids play ball, won't we? Just leave that there. No, you guys remember a few years ago, Joshua was playing soccer. And there were a couple of weekends, honestly, Josh and Tammy were here. Okay? A couple that he showed up, and he was in his soccer jersey and shorts. Okay? And one of the things we really did, it was one of those that all these games that ended up getting scheduled on Sunday. And we were very intentional about it in the fact that the ones that you had no control over, it's a tournament that you win on Saturday, you're going to play it on Sunday, or that those were a different deal. But, games that just got scheduled for 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon in Yukon, Oklahoma, not going to be there. Okay? And we told the coaches that. That's how it is. Don't plan on us. Okay? And I love it when, even when you get here to, the springtime and summertime, I love seeing kids come and they're wearing their ball uniforms because there's a game that afternoon that they're going to. And so they're going to come here because, here, you know what you're saying? I'll just tell you, this is what you're saying to your kids. This is important. We can play games, we can have fun, it is a blast to do, and we're going to be a part of it. But this is important. That's what you're saying. Okay? There also, though, there's that point where, and it's a fine line, fun and games can turn into the point that it just takes over as well. And I think that's where being intentional about it, of what is important. We can spend so much time running around doing fun stuff that we are absolutely worn out. Anybody else been there? Yeah, well, but you're here. Well, I mean, but it is. We can get going with our busyness that we've got so much stuff that's crammed in and so much stuff that's going on that we just run ourselves. Even our playtime runs us ragged. And that's just, it's us learning to be intentional about it and why we do it. And I think that we need to think, once again, I'm not being legalistic. This is not about, if you're not here, you don't do that, or that's not it at all. And I know that's where we always tend to go. It really is. You start talking about church attendance, and it's funny how many people, I'll probably still get an email about it. By the way, it's Jeff@accok.net. Just all right. But I know that's always where because I think a lot of us, though, we were even brought up in that we were taught that, you go to church, everybody goes, and you have to. Okay. You don't have to. You don't want to. You ought to excite you. You ought to want to be there. And I think the problem is, this is where this intentionality comes in. We have packed so much junk into our week. We have convinced ourselves so much that there cannot be any margin for error, that Sunday is the day that what? It's my only day to sleep in. It's my only day to rest. It's my only day off. It's my only day it's whatever else. And I think that what God would say, where it's, well, He'll forgive me. And He will. But I think what He'd probably say is, hey, what could you have done differently on Friday that would have made today a joy instead of a burden? What could you have done differently on Monday that would have made today a blessing instead of a burden? And that's the question that we have to wrestle with. So we're going to have a time of decision. I'm going to ask you to stand and just to think about that at this time. And what can you do to be intentional about the Lord's Day, about setting aside a time of Sabbath, a time of rest, a time to just breathe and to decompress? Because we need it. We need it so desperately. And when we don't have it, we do. We get stressed out, we get worn out, we get frustrated, everything else. And that's not what God wants us to be. He gave us this day for our blessing. And so I want you to we're going to have before we sing our song of decision and have our time of decision, I want us to pray. But I really do. I want you to think in this moment, what changes could I make? What decisions could I make differently? What changes could I make in my life to make Sunday a blessing rather than a burden? To be intentional about setting this time aside for what it should be. And maybe when we're going to have our prayer time, and maybe there's something that just speaks to you, and God's laying something on your heart. If you have a decision to make, I invite you to make it. Maybe you need to step into one of our prayer rooms and have one of our prayer teams pray for you or pray with you. Whatever it is you need in this moment, I'm going to ask you to do it now. Would you join me in a word of prayer? God, I pray that you would just help us to understand what this is all about. God, to know that it's not about taking attendance. It's not about anything that we have to do. It is about something that you have given us. Lord, it is about something that you know about us, that we need rest, that we need that time to recharge, that we need time to just spend decompressing and breathing. And so, God, I pray that you would just help us to see changes that we can make in our lives. Lord, I pray that you would lay it upon our hearts to understand how important this is, to not simply blow it off, but to truly take this in and understand that this is one of your 10 commandments for a reason. Because, God, you know how important it is. So, Lord, I ask that you would just speak to our hearts. I ask that you would open our eyes to changes that we can make. Lord, I pray that as we are here, that if there are decisions that need to be made, that in this moment you would guide us, that you would lead us, and we would make them. In Jesus' name we ask this. It's in his name we pray.